Life is starting to return to normal in Wuhan, where the outbreak first began. And in Beijing, mask wearing is no longer required outdoors. But are the Chinese being transparent in their apparent coronavirus success?
About a month ago, we saw flare-ups of COVID in China, including in Beijing, the capital, reportedly out in Xinjiang and elsewhere.
This is Dean Cheng, a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation.
The Chinese ascribed all of this to outside influence, whether it was Chinese people returning from overseas or foreign people coming to China. This basically, the claim is that there are no cases within China coming from the community. I find that somewhat difficult to believe, but that's what the Chinese are saying, and they're sticking to that story. So these images are basically China's state-run media saying to the Chinese people, nothing to see here, we've gotten all of this under control. Beijing also said that residents of Beijing can now go mask-free when they are outside. The problem is that there's almost no way to independently verify any of this. Beijing, as far as I know, is still not cooperating with the WHO. They are not allowing outsiders to come in and separately audit or monitor. And Chinese statistics, certainly on the economic side and the security side, have always been viewed with skepticism. I'm not sure why we should view their health statistics any more confidently.
I want to talk about the size of China, because we see statistics coming out of Europe and countries around the world, and I think that it's hard to put into perspective for many listeners just how many people live there. And when we're talking about cities like Wuhan, for example, there are millions of people, and when you're not testing everyone in a population, and they tried to reportedly do that in Wuhan, but in other cities, like you said, it's tough to independently verify whether or not they've really got it as under control as they're saying.
So, two useful metrics. One, if you are 1 in a million, there are 1,300 of you, 1,300 of you in China. Because China is 1.3 billion people. The U.S. is about 300 million people, a little more than that. So they are 4 times the size of the United States in terms of population. The nation of China physically is about the same size as the United States. Obviously, they don't have a West Coast, but broadly speaking, you could overlay the two countries on top of each other. So what the Chinese are saying is that in a country with 4 times the population, they would know whether there were any outbreaks in Pocatello, Idaho, Bar Harbor, Maine, San Antonio, Texas, Clearwater, Florida. They would know. And they are saying with absolute certainty there are no new cases.
So it's difficult to take them at their word when they're trying to be that specific and claim they have it that under control. You and I had talked before about some of the security moves China was making as a result of this pandemic, and while global attention was elsewhere, the Chinese were trying to make some serious, what appeared to be diplomatic spats at first, but then turned into real military action. What's the latest on the South China Sea and how the Chinese are posturing amid this pandemic?
In the South China Sea, things are pretty much where they have been for a while, which is they are moderately tense. The Chinese continue they've stopped island building, mostly because they finished building the islands that they were going to, but there are still military garrisons on these islands. It's an interesting contrast with what President Xi promised President Obama in 2015. At a Xi-Obama summit, he said that the Chinese leader said that he would not militarize the South China Sea. We are watching them deploy military forces to them, and the Chinese basically say that's not militarization, that's self-defense. It's an interesting definition. This week there was a very interesting photograph taken by Planet Labs that showed a Chinese submarine going into an underground, underwater cliff facility on Hainan Island, which is much further north. But it's a reminder of just how far China has gone in terms of building massive, expensive infrastructure to hide its military capabilities from our satellites, from our aircraft, from our sensors. More broadly speaking, the Chinese continue to push their Southeast Asian neighbors to accept China's claim over what is essentially most of the South China Sea. Interestingly, this year is a RIMPAC year, Rim of the Pacific, one of the largest multinational exercises led by the United States, and both Singapore and Brunei are participating. Brunei is one of the claimants to the Spratly Islands. So you're watching both sides posturing, maneuvering, both diplomatically and militarily, to try and influence the various players in the region.
What comes next, in your opinion, and where should the international community be focused? We've seen a lot of reports about how the Chinese could, for example, withhold information or data regarding vaccines in exchange for some of the military agenda items that they would like to see completed without foreign interference. How accurate are those reports, and is that where the focus for the international community should be?
Well, a major U.S. news organization uses the tagline, "Democracy dies in darkness." And I would say that not only democracy, but human rights. So I would say that, for example, it should be very worrisome that even the Chinese admit that there's been a major outbreak of COVID in Xinjiang, where the Chinese have locked up over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs, mostly for the crime of being Muslim. And scarily, much of the Arab world, it seems, Muslim nations of the Arab world have chosen to turn a blind eye to this. The U.S., I think, should be speaking out and saying, we are watching what you're doing, and this is wrong. China just sent a bunch of workers to Papua New Guinea and said that they had inoculated them with a COVID-19 vaccine. Needless to say, this caught a lot of people by surprise, including the Papua New Guineans, who basically stopped the plane and turned it around. But it's an interesting question, what the Chinese are doing with human trials, with how safe is this vaccine, how effective is this vaccine, and are they using claims of having vaccinated as a basis for sending people abroad? Again, when we look at how far the COVID-19 spread in the first place, with China not locking down, this almost looks like an invitation to round 2 or round 3 of a very dangerous situation. So I think that, it can't be done just by the United States. I think other countries also need to basically make it very clear that China's behavior needs to conform to international standards, not because we're trying to impose our will on China, but because we're not prepared to let them get us sick.
You've been listening to Dean Cheng, a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation.